Hey Sam, here's what we did to find the oil leaks. We have completely pressure washed this engine. I removed the belly pans so I could get in there and not only clean the engine but obviously inspect it. We've driven it 20 miles now. This thing was an oily mess. It's good and clean now except for where the oil, the fresh oil is leaking. That way I could distinguish several things here for you. First of all, is it leaking in more than one place? The answer to that is yes. What are the worst oil leaks? And I'm going to show that to you here in this next part of the video clip. So we're up underneath here, and this is your front crankshaft pulley right here. And you can see that all of this oil here is fresh oil. The droplets there. This is all coming from, you can even see it's slick and kind of shiny there, and it's already started to coat your big differential chunk they call that. This is the part of the differential where it's actually falling down and dripping here. This is a bad oil leak. Now this is the front crank seal, which is doing most of the leaking here. And there's also what's called an oil filter housing. Not the oil filter, but the housing itself. The crank seal is another one of those parts that were changed about 3-4 years ago, back in March of 2014. Here's why it's worn out again. This is what's called the crankshaft pulley that's bolted up. See the big bolt there to what's called the crankshaft. The crankshaft is the thingy that runs the entire length of the engine. So that's the bottom of the oil pan. It runs all the way to the front, all the way to that front crankshaft pulley. That crankshaft itself is worn. A crankshaft wears two different ways. It wears when the pistons are going up and down, and it also wears in what we call the thrust, the in and out. And that thrust movement is going to continue the heat up oil seals, that front oil seal, probably every 2 or 3 years. It's cheaper to change the seal than it is to change the entire crankshaft. The crankshaft requires overhauling the engine. Huge job. The good news is that these crankshafts on these Land Rovers would start to get a thrust wear on them. And the thrust is that back and forth I was talking about, back and forth on the pulley. And yet it wouldn't cause any deleterious effects to the engine itself. They would go miles and miles and miles with the worn thrust. The downside of it is every 2 or 3 years you need to have a seal, because once it eats up the seal it pours oil, and yours is pouring oil. It was 3 quarts low when it got here, and trust me, I could see well more than 3 or 4 more quarts that had already leaked all over this engine, because as I said, it was an oily mess. So I'm going to send you an estimate for replacing the front crankshaft and the oil filter housing. That'll take care of the worst leak. Now, it's not going to take care of all the leaks. You've also got, we're going to the back of the motor here. You can see this right here at the back of the motor. This is the transmission, and it bolts up to, this is the battery back of the motor itself. And you've got an oil starting to form here. And that is coming from your rear main seal. Again, big job, requires removal of this entire transmission to replace the rear main seal. And I want to qualify that. When we're talking about oil leaks, we've got what we call seeping, leaking, and pouring. This seal back here is seeping. Same thing with your valve cover gaskets. You really can't see them here, but they are seeping. They're up, they're way up there by the cylinder head itself. And both of them are seeping. Again, let's deal with the major issues is my recommendation at this point. Let's deal with what's pouring, and your pouring leak is here on the front. And you know, the old joke about Land Rovers always leak a little oil. They're not really leaking oil. You might have seen this bumper sticker on Land Rovers. They're actually sweating power. Ha ha. But my point being is, there's not a Land Rover that comes in here that's not leaking or seeping oil. When they pour oil, take care of the issues that are making them pour the oil, and just live with the other. I mean, if you have to add a little oil from time to time, big deal. But right now I can tell you've been going through quite a bit of oil because I can see this as a bad oil leak. So we'll send you an estimate on the worst of the oil leak. One other thing, it's up top here and it's incidental, but one of your washer jets over on the passenger side are broken, and because your washer jet is broken, you've got no washer jet action. All the water, when you press it, the washer windshield just pours out of a hose under the hood. So you need to have a washer jet. You'll see that on the estimate. There's no labor to put it on. It's just one of those incidental things that it's nice to have a windshield washer, especially during the winter weather where you need to clean off ice and things such as that. If you can squeeze that into your budget, then just give us an okay on that. And I want to point out that's why you'll see a washer jet on the estimate.